Hey folks, Matt with Printavo. Today I'm at Sound and Fury. We're going to go over some important things when printing with your white ink. Now, people have a lot of bad experiences with white ink because it tends to be the thickest or the most viscous of all the inks. Now that is true, just because of the particle size and what the ink has to do, it's oftentimes going to be the thickest. Now, different white inks are going to have different viscosities. You can have your low bleeds, your cottons, and your poly white inks. Those white inks are meant to have different matte down characteristics for the fibers they're going on. That's also why you usually don't want to have one white ink for your shop. You want to make sure you're using the right white ink for what it's going on top of. Now you can say I want the best of them to go on all of them, but the best of them might be something you don't want, right? So a poly white might be too thick, and you find that printing it thin on a cotton shirt doesn't work well, and it costs more. So it's really important to first know that you're using the right white ink for the substrate you're going on. After that, there's lots of different tricks you can do to help make sure you're printing the best that you can. So a few things to think about are, what mesh count am I going through? Making sure you're going through the right mesh count will help lay down the right deposit. Of course, your art is going to help determine that, but make sure you understand how much you're trying to actually pass through the screen. Also, your coating technique and how thick your stencil is, or EOM, emulsion over mesh. Make sure that's the proper size will help make sure you've got a clean deposit of ink onto your shirt. Not too heavy, not too light. Will also help make sure you've got crisp edging. After that, I like to look at the ink itself. So with the ink, you can do a few different things. The first thing I always recommend you do is agitate the ink. There's ways to buy large turnabout mixers that will mix a 5-gallon or a gallon bucket, or you can also go ahead and get yourself something like this, a mixing blade and a drill. We also have a bigger one to go into the gallons. I like to use that to make sure that I mix the ink up for a few minutes before I use it. That will drop the body and the viscosity of the ink and make it flow much better. After that, I'll also look at possible additives. Do I want my white ink to be thinned down, reduce its coverage? Do I want to thicken it up? What do I want to do with it? And having different additives available to mix into that ink to achieve what I want. After that, on press, having a warm platen will help make sure that the ink drops down and it flashes the quickest possible. It's also going to continue to add heat up into that ink, which is going to reduce its body once again. So always preheat your flashes. Alright, so I went ahead and took some of my white ink here. I added about 5% of my reducer into this white ink. I'm going to go ahead and use the mixing drill, mix it up, and make sure it's ready to go. Alright, now I would do that usually for about 3 minutes just to make sure it's ready to go. Now I can see it's actually quite a bit smoother than it was when I came to it, especially in the morning if it was cold at the shop. So now it's already moving a lot better inside the container. I'm going to go ahead and take it to press. So now that I'm on press and I've got my white ink in my screen, there's a few more things to keep an eye on. One is to make sure you're choosing the correct squeegee durometer for the work you're using. This is a triple durometer, 65, 90, 65. There's lots of options for this. It really comes down to personal preference. I like this because it allows very smooth deposit while still making sure to keep the dots and the edges very tight. The other thing to note is what your off contact actually is. So the space between the screen and the platen, or the shirt on the platen, really is where it is. If it's too loose, there's where it's right on top of it, what's going to happen is it will peel up and you'll actually get a stucco ceiling look. It won't be a smooth print. Also, the mesh itself. If your mesh itself is too loose of a mesh, it'll also do the same thing. It'll drag into the ink and then slowly ripple back up. So make sure you've got a nice tight screen and you've got proper off contact. If you're not sure what the off contact should be, my basic rule of thumb is I would like it to be about a nickel's thickness over the surface of the shirt. That way if I'm printing like any kind of garment, t-shirt, hoodie, whatever, I adjust that off contact to be level and 1 nickel's thickness over that shirt. Now for fine printing, that rule will change. So by no means is it going to be that way for everything, but a good key rule of thumb to start off with is that nickel's thickness. So now that I feel everything's good to go here, I'm going to go ahead and flood the ink, making sure it gets a nice deposit into my stencil. And then I'm going to double stroke it. I'm on a manual, so I'm going to double stroke it just to make sure I properly drop that deposit onto my test fabric. Single hit, it looks great. I'm going to go ahead and flash this. Bring it back around, do my second hit. Tap it, make sure it's gel cured, which is just the surface being dry enough to print on top of. We don't want it to be fully cured underneath, otherwise this top white will not adhere to it. Flood it again. Looks pretty good. Now on this fabric, which is a test fabric, there's a lot of fibers, so I'm going to see a lot of fibrillation. I want to make sure I keep an eye on that. On the actual garments, I shouldn't see that because it's going to be a higher quality garment. But what I'm looking for right now is how easy that white was to pass through this screen and what that coverage looks like. We look good. Alright, I'm going to take my test fabric off, run it through the dryer, and then do a test on the actual shirt. Now that I know my white ink looks good on the test fabric, I'm going to go ahead and print one on the actual garment. I'm going to do a print flash print and make sure it looks good here. Good. All right, looks great. Because I know I've got good mesh, good emulsion over mesh, good off contact, and I've used the correct additives for my white ink, selected the correct white ink, and made sure to pay attention to all the variables in my white ink, I now have a great crisp white ink for this shirt. Very happy with this. I'm going to go ahead and send it to the dryer, and we're going to start the run.